Welcome and thank you for joining us for the agriculture-focused breakout session. We called it Voices from the Fields. Farmers share their perspectives. I want to first thank the Planning Committee for this session and Thistleton, who actually could not be here today, but she put in a whole lot of time. Patty Becknell, who's handing out all these forms, and myself, Joan Gregory. We are three city folk who knew very little about agriculture and even less about alfalfa. But we were convinced that we needed to learn more so that we, the city folk, can work together with the farmers and the legislature and others to figure out how to get water to Great Salt Lake in time. We know that losing Great Salt Lake is not an option, so we must work together. But how? We have all by now seen the pie chart. We have learned that nearly 3/4 of our water usage goes to agriculture overall, and that alfalfa farming uses about 68% of available water. Clearly, it is a water-intensive crop. So it made sense to look to agriculture and specifically alfalfa to provide the solution. Just switch crops. Stop growing alfalfa and use less water. Sorry guys, that's what the city folk were thinking. But it's not that simple, as Matt has already started to show us, and we have been learning. It is not that simple. There's more to the story. Our session today is a listening session. Our role is to gain a deep understanding of the challenges that alfalfa farmers are facing so we can get to the work of solving the Great Salt Lake crisis together, not just for the short term, but sustainably for the long term. Our panelists have agreed to come today to give us a farmer's perspective and share with us the complexities of farming and switching crops. Each panelist will provide a unique perspective based on his experiences. Each panelist will speak for about 10 minutes. We encourage you to write your questions on the note cards as you think of them and pass them to the end of the rows for collection. Patty will be collecting those. Patty, raise your hand there. Okay, thank you. And after all panelists speak, the remaining time will be spent on Q&A. We will pull questions from the note cards, and there will also be an opportunity to ask questions directly. There are sign-in sheets being passed around as well. Please fill in the information requested so that we can contact you after today for follow-up activities and action. Our common goal is to get water to Great Salt Lake, and it will take all of us. So let's get started. Our first panelist, and I'm going to introduce all of our panelists, and then they'll take a microphone and keep passing it along here. Our first panelist is Trevor Nielsen. He is the water manager for Bear River Canal Company and comes from a farming family and has a lot to tell us about alfalfa, water optimization, and more. He will be followed by Clay Carter, who has changed the way he irrigates, and as an engineer has created many technological interventions to modernize farming. Then Braden McMurdy, thank you Braden. Our last panelist will address changes in farming methods, the best options for environmental and soil health, and the benefits of buying local. And then U.S. Professor Matt Yost has agreed to participate in the Q&A portion of the session.
That's what I'm here for.
Okay. Very good. And we have someone else who's, what's your first name?
Jeff.
Jeff is here to
I farm in northern Utah.
And who farms in northern Utah and has joined our panel to help with the Q&A session. So please listen as our farming experts share their perspectives with us. Please give a warm welcome to our farmers.
mentioned, my name is Trevor Nelson. I'm the general manager of the Bear River Canal Company. We irrigate 68,000 acres in northern Utah, using 126 miles of canal. We're the largest single irrigation company in the state of Utah. Our system services about 2,000 farming families, and Jeff Hardy here is our company president, who's joining me today on the panel. And your fifth or fourth generation? Fifth generation dairy farmer. So there are difficulties in agriculture. This slide here is a little bit in gist, but there are some realities to that. We're seeing a lot of social pressure to produce in a certain way and produce certain results, and we're trying to arise to that occasion. But just like any other small business in the economy, we're facing those same pressures as individual farmers and as irrigation companies. So I wanted to focus on two of those problems. The first is water. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this particular one today, just because Matt, sounds like, has done a good job of talking about water consumption, and some of the other speakers about the historic drought that we've just hopefully started to turn the corner on. But one thing we want to talk about is through the Agricultural Optimization Program, through the Water Smart Program, the NRC SPL 566 program, farmers are making significant changes to how they farm. They are not farming their father's farm anymore. They're changing everything from the way their day-to-day tasks are completed to how they assess the health of their crops. And a lot of that is centered around water. We do live in a desert, and that is the key to being a successful farmer. Even ranchers, that is the biggest concern among ranchers in our arid climate, even though, you would think they're thinking more on the animal husbandry side of things. Really it comes down to, can they get water for their animals? The second thing that I wanted to talk about is labor. I talked about how it's not your father's farm anymore. And a lot of this has to do with how we farm. Farm machinery is becoming much, much more expensive, but it's also does quite a bit more per person. And there just aren't people who are willing to go out at 3 o'clock in the morning and change the water. But we understand that that's a social expectation, that we are efficient with our water and we're rolling it quickly, we're using it as efficiently as possible. And so this slide here shows a system we're going to learn a little bit more about that Clay Carter has developed that automates the flood irrigation system. Some of the things that have probably been shared earlier is there's certain parts of the state because of soil composition where you can't use sprinklers. And there's also a lot of research about how sprinklers do increase, there's less diverted water, but they also have a higher evaporative component. And so are you saving that much on the consumptive portion of the water? In other words, the water that actually leaves the water cycle in the state of Utah. Flood traditionally has used a lot of water, but a lot of that water goes down into the ground and pops back up in the aquifer. And so there is not a one-size-fits-all. And so we've seen some great improvements with sprinkler irrigation with the invention of the pivot. And hopefully what Clay and others in his space are doing is making it so that we can now match that on the flood side. So I really like this quote, we can do hard things and we will be better for it. And that really does describe the Intermountain West farmer. We are having to do things differently than we have ever before. But we would ask patience from those particularly from the environmental community, because if we were to compare this to a road, this is where we have been as far as the expectations of society upon us. And this is now what's being expected of us. We got to move a lot more traffic through the same space. And that takes time to do that. These systems took decades to build, and we're being asked to transform them and to become, many times, 20, 30, 40, 50% more efficient, but yet it took us decades to build them. We need some time to be able to adapt them. We are not a quick fix, but we are the lasting fix. And what I mean by that is the savings that we make, although they take time, will be generational changes that will be available for other uses in the water system. The second point I wanted to talk about that sometimes is forgotten is that agriculture is simply the manipulation of the micro environment. We are trying to manage the environment for a specific need, usually a specific crop. And it creates an environment for which wildlife will thrive. And so one thing we want to point out is that some people say that let's just hack agriculture off, let's just be done with it. We could go on for a half hour about the negative externalities that will happen because of that. But one of the things I wanted to point out is every morning, this is what I see. I go out into the field, I check the canals, we see our new automation system in operation. We check for our aquatic weeds, but we see wildlife all over the place. The northeast branch of the Great Salt Lake, a lot of the food source for the migratory bird refuge comes out of the farmers' fields of the Bear River Canal Company. And if that disappears, if our water is taken away or if we're developed over, that ecosystem service is never going to be returnable. It's just going to go away. And so we feel, a very vital part of propping up the existing ecosystem that we have, particularly in our case on the northeast branch of the Great Salt Lake. This is a map of our system, and as you can see, here's the migratory bird refuge. Here is the Bear River Duck Club. This is the State of Utah Public Shooting Grounds, which is a managed wildlife area. This is the State Salt Creek Refuge. And then you can see several small duck clubs as you come up and through. Without Bear River Canal Company, other than the Migratory Bird Refuge, none of those would exist in the way that we know them today, because all of them are shareholders in the Bear River Canal Company. And that's not really, it's a little bit unique, but it's not unheard of. You go to any canal company and they're probably some sort of an environmental interest that has shares in that company to help provide water when nature wouldn't provide water in the dead heat of the summer. So moving on to the last topic, alfalfa, the A word. There's several good reasons why we grow alfalfa. There's a great article put together by Utah State that lists these 10 reasons why alfalfa is highly suitable for the West. I want to highlight 3 of those. First of all, for the units of relative feed value you get out of alfalfa, it is perhaps the most productive crop, because you cut it off this high off the ground and every ounce of the plant is used. Whereas corn, you chop it off, you spread it, the only thing you're taking is the cob, unless you're going to chop it for silage. Wheat, you've got the same thing, you're taking this much of the head, right? The rest of it's just chaff. Now we do use that chaff, but it's not a food source, right? So that's one thing. The next thing is it's flexible irrigation. Jeff, he and I were just talking about how when things get tight, his hay is able to take some of the stress. And so it allows other crops to take that, or you have options as far as your irrigation goes. And then the next thing is it's resilient and adaptable, meaning you can take the water up of alfalfa and it doesn't ruin the crop. If you don't water corn the last time, you will lose 50% of your yield. You don't water alfalfa for one crop, it will come back once you put water back to it. So I'm going to skip that and come on here. So these are the consumption in inches, acre inches, of the different crops. And one of the misconceptions I think that we have is that if we take water out, or if we take alfalfa out of the cycle, it's going to solve the water problem. So if you were to take all the alfalfa out of the cropping cycle in the state of Utah, there would be one major change. It's called double cropping. So essentially what happens is they chop, or prematurely they'll chop it for feed, barley, and then they'll flip to a corn crop. And if you look at the consumption, essentially you use the water to this point, harvest the crop, and immediately move to another crop. And if you add these up, you end up with 29.1 inches of consumption. If you compare that to alfalfa, dairy grade alfalfa, you're within 0.2 of an inch of as much water. So it's not about switching crops, it's about getting the right amount of water, and only the right amount of water, and the exact right amount of water to the plant when it needs it.
not necessarily just the crop itself. And we can do that with the systems that are being developed. We just need some time to do it. And so we appreciate your patience and your understanding as you consider solutions for the lake, because we feel like we're certainly a good portion of we feel that we can do our part if given the time. Thank you.
Good morning. It's good to be with you. My name is Clay Carter. I was born in northern Utah. I was educated at Utah State University in mechanical engineering and then went on to Virginia Tech in graduate programs. So I have a dual interest here. I love technology. I love solving problems, but I grew up and was raised on a farm. So I understand the issues that farmers face and have a great love for agriculture in the state of Utah. Over the past few years in my engineering business, we design and build production lines for companies such as Autoliv and Northrop Grumman and other Utah companies here. The last few years of the pandemic exposed a great weakness in our systems, and that was supply chains broke drastically. Some components that we needed in our business, all of a sudden, they used to be 4-week lead times. They became 48 week minimum lead times, and some of them out in the 80 to 90 week lead times. Supply chains fell apart. It was a drastic, devastating issue. When I come back and I start thinking about agriculture in this sense, Utah currently does not produce enough food to support our own population. If we go down the road of eliminating all agriculture, we become 100% dependent on supply chains, we put ourselves at greater risk, and it's something that is of great concern to me. Growing up on a farm, I recognized that there were challenges that farmers faced. I own, with my father, about a 250-acre farm. I recognized over the last 10 years that irrigation was becoming more and more challenging. Water issues were growing, and had read literature and collaborated with other scientists about different forms of irrigation. Northern Utah is really conducive to flood irrigation, but traditional flood, as my grandfather did, is inefficient. There's better ways to do it, and surge irrigation is what I'm going to talk about. What is surge irrigation? It's a form of flood irrigation, but it requires special care in a field. The field has to be leveled with a precise slope put on it. We have to be able to deliver water in a higher quantity, volume flow rate, if you will, and you have to change the water often in the field. So the slide that you're seeing right now is modeling what we would call surge irrigation. So if you envision a field that is broken up into 3 dikes, traditionally a farmer would spread that water out over most of that field, so he didn't have to come back to change the water until maybe 12 hours later. Well, that doesn't work with surge irrigation. The idea behind surge is put it on a small area, push it very hard, and change it often, and you're going to incrementally push the water down the field. What happens in this process is, as the water moves over the top of the ground and then you move it to another dike, that water soaks in that first dike and it seals that layer up, and so it stops deep percolation. It stops the non-beneficial use of water, or the lost water, or it doesn't stop it, but it slows it greatly. University of California, Davis started this research in the 1970s and into the 80s. They reported that 30 to 50% water savings was possible, but they had to do it manually. They parked students in the field and made them change the water every 30 minutes. Poor students, I feel for them. Texas A&M and the University of Nebraska have gone on and done a great deal more study in this, and with semi-automated systems, and they've looked at it with a dozen different crop types, corn being a major one for the University of Nebraska. They reported water savings in the neighborhood of of 35 to 55% in that range. In 2020, I implemented a surge irrigation system on my farm. Participation from the state of Utah under the UDAF water optimization program was a key component in this. Over the past 3 years, I've demonstrated 30 to 50% water savings are possible depending on lots of conditions that exist in the fields.
Could you hold the mic just a little bit more, Blake? Tilt your mic a little bit so it's good.
Okay.
There we go.
Can't hear you.
Great.
Much better.
Much better, thank you. Problems with implementation of surge is if you have to do it manually, it's just not possible. You can't live in the field and change it that often. It's just impossible to do. I'll show you one of these valves that is implemented. The problem with how to implement this in the field, we're in a remote spot, you have no power, communication is a problem. So in order to implement an automated system like this, you gotta have power and you've gotta have connection to the cloud. So today, we've solved that problem. I can irrigate my farm from my phone. The entire 250 acres is now irrigatable from my phone. If I look at historical, on one particular test plot, we have 4 acre-feet allocated per acre per year. That, from 2000 to 2018, we used every drop of that. There were problems with the field, there were problems all over that caused us to use all that field. In 2019, we did a leveling project and piping it, we saved a bunch of water. In 2020, we implemented the surge and went through the 2021, 2022 seasons under a surge condition. If you look at the bottom line there, that is the total usage of water last year, the 2.545 acre feet. That particular year, we irrigated 9 times. At this time last year, 1 year ago today, I had irrigated that field 5 times. This year, I've irrigated it twice. Mother Nature plays a big difference. This year, I'm on course to use approximately maybe 18 total inches. That's if it stays dry the rest of the year. If Mother Nature participates and helps, it will be less than that. So there's other factors that come into play, but 2021, 2022 were good gauges to look at it and say, okay, let's compare for the last few years. How much water could we save? 1.5 acre feet is realistic. The issue you have on a farm, you're in a dirty environment. You have great big equipment that's going to be adjacent to it. Implementation is not easy. You have to build systems that are robust, that will function, and will be there for the next 25 years. So this is something that we've gone about developing. We've further, with participation from the Bear Brook Canal Company, automated the head gates that control the flow out of a canal. One of the big issues that we face with surge is you have to control the inflows from the canal. A wildly varying canal results in inefficiencies in surge irrigation. You can't push the water that you need to, and it results in inefficiencies in the process. So this is a head gate that's been automated. Trevor and Jeff are participants in that. And this head gate is now being used to study exactly how much water we really have to push to make surge as efficient as possible. We're finding that the data is showing that the preliminary results are showing that the amount of water we really need to push is higher than the traditional flow rates of these head gates. So looking at canal systems over the long haul, we may have to adjust how they function, how they deliver water in order to become more efficient. we put flow meters in so we know exactly how much water is going on to a farm. The flow meter on the left is showing, is embedded in a pipe, and then the one on the right is a flume. I've installed approximately 120 of these valves and have irrigated this 250 acres this way this year. The results so far are very promising. It's encouraging to see what we can do. As we get into the question and answer period, I hope you'll reach out about things that are possible. I will share this one little tidbit to you. When we talk about conservation, farmers in general are trying to conserve. I also sit on the canal board in North Logan, where I live. So I farm in Corinne, I live in Logan. In that area, we decided to study and look at how much water was being used inside the city at the residence. I put a water meter out and measured my next door neighbor, who's an elderly gentleman, great guy. Over the course of the year on his little lot, he used 81 inches of water. 81. My alfalfa field used 24. Thank you.
Well, thank you to Trevor and Clay for what they have taught us about and spoken about. I'm in their same area. I farm and ranch in northern Utah. We get our water from the Bear River Canal Company that Trevor manages for us. And it's a big system. It's a complicated system, as he explained. What I wanted to talk to you today about is a little bit about what we're doing. I apologize I don't have a slide. I was told that technology wouldn't be available. I should have just assumed that it would be in today's world. But so I'll go off of some notes that I made. But a little bit about me. I am third generation farmer and rancher on our property. We grow a diverse array of crops. We don't focus on one specific thing, and the reason why is because our focus has always been around soil health. So soil health and regenerative agriculture is a little bit about the road I want to take you down for the next 9 minutes. I was told I had 10 minutes, and I told Ann, I said, there's no way I can explain what we do in 10 minutes. So good luck to you for getting what you can get out of this. Has anyone heard the word regenerative agriculture? If I raise a hand. Okay. So there's a lot of definitions out there on what it would be. You can find them all over the internet and YouTube. I want to give you mine. If I can read my own handwriting, right? So, one second. See, power slides are just more efficient. Working in sync with nature's cycles in a way that promotes life and increases profitability on the land. So when I say nature's cycles, maybe you're wondering what that would mean. I'm talking about the very cycles that all people living on the land work with. We have the energy cycle, we have the water cycle, which is the one we're all thinking about today. And then we have the nutrient cycle. Those cycles function everywhere in the world the same way. They're all trying, it's everywhere in the world, those cycles are trying to function in the same way. And so a couple of things that we've done on our operation is what I want to take you through. A little bit of history for us, we've always tried to optimize the way we utilize our resources. I remember my grandpa saying when laser leveling came out, he jumped right on it to increase the efficiency of the water use on our operation. When concrete ditches became applicable, we started putting in concrete ditches to reduce absorption and loss of water, and now we're doing piped ditches and the list goes on, and as we've been taught by Clay, that's a direction, another tool that we have. So we're always looking at those ways, but as we've gone down the path of how to increase our soil health, it's led us, originally our thought was, we need to feed the mouths that are in our family. I'm, like I said, third generation. There's multiple families trying to make a living on our operation. So the easiest way we found to do that, because you all know how expensive land has gotten, is instead of buying more land, we began to stack enterprises on that land. And this gives us a great opportunity to grow and expand and increase our profitability and better use our resources. So cattle just became to make sense, because that's something we were already raising, was beef, that we would put them back on the land and we would change the way we manage them a little. So that was a big help for us. And we started to notice, as we utilize them as a tool to increase soil health, that our soil function began to change. When you talk about soil function, what's soil supposed to do? You know, Clay mentioned how as we would irrigate, our soils would silt over and seal off and not aggregate and not allow the water to infiltrate and be held there. So that's a big focus on our operation. We're always trying to increase that functionability. And as we began to look at livestock on our operation as a way to do that, we began to see changes. And it's the proper management that was the key for us, you know, moving them frequently and allowing the land to rest and heal. So the major key points that we focus on in soil health are, we are always trying to keep our soil covered. That's a big one on our operation. I hate to walk around and see bare dirt. It's hard on me. That soil armor reduces our evaporation drastically. It keeps our ground soil temperatures where they should be, and it also allows for better aggregation. We keep a growing plant on our operation as much as possible. You've heard the term cover crops. Cover crops sometimes they get looked at as the answer. Cover crops are not an answer. They are a tool to accomplish the functions of soil health. And that's the way we look at them on our operation. So a living root, so behind our cash crops, whether that's corn or wheat or alfalfa, whatever it is, we're adding a large variety of other plant species to increase the functionability of the soil. We minimize our disturbance. It was difficult, but I did convince Dad to sell a plow. Other farmers have a different opinion on how they work their ground, but selling the plow was the best thing we did for our pocketbooks and the way that we farm. We were able to increase our farm profitability going down that road. And we purchased a no-till drill, and we converted our farm 100% no-till, which is a great opportunity. There's been a big learning curve for us. It's a different way. But ultimately it is the future of our farm and our operation. And I just love having that extra time in the spring as well, that I'm not out on the disc or the plow. And so does my wife. So just with the few minutes that I have, just a couple of quick numbers as we've studied what we've done, and USU's been out to research and study, and the NRCS has been great to work with and come out and done research plots on our operation. The average corn bushel in our nation right now requires about 3,000 gallons to produce a bushel of corn. And that's the corn seems to be the driving number in our economic scale right now. Our area in Box Elder County, we're pretty conservative. We do a pretty good job. The average right now, from the research I could find, was between 1,800 and 2,100 gallons per bushel, which is pretty good. I think you ought to give the farmers and ranchers up there, some credit for the efficiency and the conservancy that we're always trying to apply. On my operation, some of my better ground that we've applied these principles for the longest amount of time, we're down to 1,550 gallons. So half the nation's average, which we look at that a win. That's a big win. That's a lot of gallons that we've been able to better utilize. There's only so much water, just to kind of finish up, there's only so much water in our system, and we all share it. We all need a certain amount of it. And we need to be looking at ways that each one of us are going to better utilize what we're allowed to have. You know, my grandpa purchased the water shares that he has now on our operation that we utilize, and a lot of work and sacrifice went into acquiring those, and we've always tried to best utilize those in the way that we can. And each one of us has a certain amount of water that we use in our lives. And we always ought to be looking at every way possible that we can better conserve what we're allowed to use. And the answer for us has been providing a product direct that we can sell direct to the consumers. And that support from our community has allowed us to change the way that we farm in our commodities and be more efficient. That's what's made it all work. And the people up there that help support us, that buy our product, have allowed us to make these major changes in our operation. So I appreciate them, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, panelists, for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. And now I'm going to turn the session over to Patty so that she can coordinate our Q&A part of the session. Okay, Patty,
Thank you.
take it away.
And before we start with the questions, first of all, I want to thank our panelists again, because these guys were very brave in coming, I think, because we kind of are sometimes demonize our farmers, which is extremely unfair. So we're hoping that your opinion has changed by listening to them and the complexities of farming. It's a hard life. They love it, and I think they're trying to be as conservative as they can. But what we do also makes a difference, and what we eat makes a difference. So it's up to us also to help them. And I'm trying to put these, some of you have asked the same questions or similar questions, so I'll just try to put them in groups. So one of the first ones is, how much of our, and panelists, anyone can answer. We only have 25 minutes to go. So if one of you answers sufficiently, or if the rest of you feel like you also need to add something new, please do. But our first question is, how much of the alfalfa that we grow is actually used, or the food we grow is actually eaten here in Utah? And how much is possibly shipped overseas?
You want me to take that one? So I can just talk loud if you can hear me. Can you hear me okay? I'll try to speak loud. So that's a very common question that comes up. Why are we exporting a large percentage of our water to China or to Asia, right? We know that alfalfa is exported out of the state. You might be surprised to learn that it is not the majority of the alfalfa. It's a minority. The estimates are hard to track, but they're about 15, sometimes up to 20% of our alfalfa is exported. There's some that goes out of the state, but usually it's always less than a third that leaves the state, either leaves the state and stays in the country, or is shipped overseas. So it is not the majority. It's a minority. Most of the alfalfa that's produced here is used on farms and ranches to feed cattle, to feed livestock. What proportion of our food that we produce here stays here? It really depends on the industry. Some it's not much, some it's really high. A lot of our dairy industry stays here. Some other industries are shipped out more. So it's hard, those numbers vary by the industry. So.
Well, just a thought, I've heard individuals say, well, agriculture only constitutes 3% of the GDP of the state, but yet uses the majority of the water. why are we spending so much of our water on food when it doesn't seem to be, producing very much of the GDP? Here's something to think about. My background is in agricultural economics, and really as a human being, if you're spending more than 10% of your income, or the society as a whole is spending more than 10% of the GDP on food, your quality of life will be worse than your parents' was. As human beings, we have been advancing, particularly the last 100 years, to where in the last 150 years it's swapped from we spent 90% of our time making our food to now we're spending 10% of our time. And so comparing that is not really comparing apples to apples. Another thing to consider is vegetable crops are per acre a lot more valuable than the crops we grow in this state. Case in point, half of the nation's value of crops is grown in the Central Valley of California, where all the vegetables are grown. But yet think of the Corn Belt and how many millions upon millions of acres of corn is grown. Or the Wheat Belt, how many millions and millions of acres of wheat. That's the base of the human diet, those cereal grains. We can't necessarily just base it on the monetary value, because your diet, the majority of your diet is based on the cheap cereal grains, not necessarily all the vegetable side. So be careful when you look at the strict monetary value, because your food, fortunately for us as human beings, is getting cheaper and cheaper.
What, no, I don't want that, thank you. I have a really loud voice. What can we do to afford to, what can we do in the effort to increase water efficiency on farms, and what can we ask the legislature to still do?
I can spend a little bit of time on that. Water optimization program has been an excellent program. I've been involved in it. I sit on the newly appointed Water Optimization Board. Anything we can do as agriculturists, as farmers, we want to do our part. We're not opposed to doing our part and our share in the savings of water, but if the public can help with some of that, it's expensive, right? We farm about 2,000 acres, and we've started transitioning over to piping our canals and our ditches and trying to save water. I'm going to be doing a project with Clay on some of my ground, but to transition 2,000 acres into these programs is going to take some time and cash. We've been in the dairy business for over 40 years, and our last load of cows went down the road, so we're not in the dairy business anymore. We're not producing. We milk 2,000 cows and they're gone. So we're transitioning a lot of different things, but we just ask that they continue to support us, and we will continue to do the best we can, and we will continue to move forward. I told Clay he skipped a generation. He talked about his dad, who they had large fields and they tried to push water over. I'm the generation, we made our fields smaller, we went a little shorter, and tried to push the water through faster, because it's healthier for the crop. The longer we stand water on a crop, the less healthy it is. So now Clay's taking it to another step, the next generation, and we're going to see some real improvement over the next coming years.
What happens to the water saved?
Water savings?
Yeah, what happens to that if you use
Some
less
of it's
water?
going out the end of the canals into the Great Salt Lake. One example I can tell you, if I got a ditch that's a mile long to where I'm getting that water, I turn the head gate on, it was taking an hour and a half to 2 hours to fill. Now when I turn the head gate on to that pipe, within 5 minutes it's at the bottom of that pipe because the pipe's full. I don't have to wet the dirt ditch up. I don't have to recharge everything. I turn the head gate on, I got water. So that's a savings to everybody. It's a savings to me. It's a savings to what might go out the end of the canal.
Well, to get more directly at your point, as a canal manager, I can tell you that during the dead heat of the summer, the farmers are definitely putting that savings to use on the crop because the crop is stressed. We talked about you need the water, the right amount of water at the right place at the right time, right? But where the savings in agricultural optimization comes in is on the shoulders of the season, the spring and the fall. We've implemented these super efficient forms of irrigation, and that carries in the middle of the summer, but also on the edges. So we don't have to take as much water from the river on the shoulders of the season. And the great thing about the Great Salt Lake is it doesn't really care when it gets the water. It just needs to be wet. And so that's where you're gonna see a lot of the savings, in my opinion. I don't know, Matt might have some thoughts on that.
I'd agree. I'd just add two other different topics because I think you covered that well. One, use less water is how you can help agriculture. The less we use in cities, the more we can use to produce food. And then another would be buy local. Braden gave a great example of how his farm has been able to diversify, grow different crops because the community supports it. They pay probably a higher amount for their food because it's local.
Yeah, pay attention to labels. It'll tell you where it's grown, whether it's being shipped in from out of state or out of country.
Just one more thing to add to that. I currently serve on the Utah State Soil Health Committee at a state level. And that is our number one question. As the governor oversees, his department oversees our committee, and that's the question we're always asking. And one of the big topics that comes up a lot is to support a local farmer in any way you can. I mean, ask yourself, where are you buying your food from? Do you know where it comes from? And if you can, in any way you can, support someone local, because that allows them to change the way that they utilize their water. They don't have to worry about so much commodity crops. They can get a better premium and better water utilization on a crop that can supply you with food. The other point is, on a legislature level, we need support getting the funding. As Jeff talked about, some of these systems are expensive, and we need support behind that. There's a lot of tools that we changed the tools that we utilize on our operations so that we can better grow a product, we can better utilize the water that we do have. Those tools aren't cheap either, and so it just takes a lot of support. It's going to take all of us.
So just to address that issue a little bit, the governor asked for $200 million in the last legislative session, and the legislature turned around and allocated $400 million to water optimization programs in the state of Utah. 200 of that is dedicated right towards agriculture. But when we look at what's the cost of this, if you look at subsurface drip, that may be $4,000 per acre to install it, and then maintenance costs year after year are significant. A pivot may be $3,500 an acre to implement, but that doesn't work in a lot of Utah. Surge irrigation may be $2,500 an acre to implement with pipes and everything that you need to do. So the cost of the farmer, and you talk about Jeff, he says he's got 2,000 acres under his control right now. Well, I don't think he has $3,000 an acre to go drop in and make it all optimized today. It's just financially not viable when you look at the cost of our food. That's 10% of our daily budget or annual budget. The economics just don't work.
And to add the canal component to that, for Bear River Canal Company, we plan on about $1 million a mile to put it into impermeable liner. And so canals are really expensive per foot to get into a sealed conduit.
How many miles do you have?
126 miles.
So how much more money do you need from the legislature?
I don't know if you can quantitate how much, but just a consistent, not a little here and then nothing, and then a little here and nothing. Just a consistent flow. Doesn't have to be a huge flow. It's going to take time, and a lot of the people a lot of the farms I run are your neighbors. They're people who are living in town, own Grandpa's farm, and I run it. And some of those are also part of the program. They're applying for these water optimization to help the farmer that runs Grandpa's farm. So,
But Ben Abbott recently spoke about time and this problem, and he said rather than thinking of it as a sprint or a marathon, we need to think of it as a sprint first and a marathon. And so if we're going to have a sprint first, how much money is needed for that sprint first to get as much water that is currently being used by agriculture to the Great Salt Lake, and then to change the system so that we sustainably in the future are able to operate in conjunction in sustainability with our land.
So a year ago, Mitt Romney was on the farm, and last fall, the Undersecretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture was there. Also, the Undersecretary of the Department of Interior were there. And they asked that same question of what would it take to make all the farms in northern Utah efficient. Well, just the canal component alone, you're talking in approximately $800 million to pipe that system, and that's at a rudimentary level. To make it really efficient, you're talking $1 billion. But then to trickle out to the farms, you're talking almost another $600 million to make them all efficient. But you can't do that all in 1 or 2 years. It's going to take 5+ to put that all in place and make it happen. You just can't shove it all into 24 months and make that happen.
Well, and a case in point, we received about $3 million this we had planned $3 million worth of improvements, which is more than we made, anyways. It was it would have been the biggest improvement project in our company's history, but because of the winter, we simply did not have the manpower or the implementation window to make that happen. Piping a canal, it takes a significant amount of time just to do the grading and those types of things. So even if we had $3 billion today to throw at this problem, it would still take us at least a decade with an open checkbook to do the job, because it just takes time. We just don't have the physical resources, even if we could throw the money at it. So that's why in my presentation I said, give us the time and we are the longer term solution, but we have to have some time to do it.
Hi, is this on? Is this on? Okay, this is on. First I wanted to say thank you guys so much for coming. This has been really interesting. I grew up in Salt Lake, and I feel like it's very scary to see all the changes happening, and I can, empathize with how you guys must feel, feeling like your lifestyles are threatened and things like that. One of the things you guys were just talking about is money for optimization programs, but also how that takes a long time, and we know that the Great Salt Lake has maybe 5 years before it dries up, which is very fast. And so it seems like, from my perspective, it seems like you might at some point need to fallow some fields, and I'm wondering if you guys know of folks doing that, if that's something that you think farmers would be open to, if they were getting financial support from the state government. Are there programs that are encouraging that? Just anything in that realm.
So last fall, the Undersecretary of Interior said to me that they were paying farmers down in the Central Valley area and in that area, they were paying them about $500 per acre foot to rent their water so they could support households in Southern California. Think about the ramifications of that. If you take a farm out of production, the chances of getting it back in production go down with every year it's out. Is summer fallowing a possibility? Sure, but it has other ramifications that the cost, long-term costs, are not easily seen at this moment, and we have to really think about, do we want to go down that road?
Great question, and I alluded to that. you know, in the Colorado, we're doing it in Utah right now. The Colorado River Basin, we're paying farmers to fallow fields. Anywhere from $200 to $400 per acre to do that. So it's happening, it's an option, it's a short-term option, it's a Band-Aid. We can get water temporarily, but it's really difficult on the agriculture industry and all of the associated industries. You know, it's easy to look at water and say, hey, what's the value of your alfalfa? Okay, we'll pay you that value so you don't water it. But it's not that simple. Everything else is connected, right? The inputs they buy, the insurance they buy, all the businesses that are associated with the farm, everyone is influenced when the farmer doesn't produce that crop, right? So it's a huge cost to do that. The other thing that's challenging, so the first hurdle is to use less water. The second hurdle is to track it so it gets to the lake. And this is not a criticism, but we've made a good progress towards getting over the first hurdle. We've spent $200 million plus on using less water. In the last session, we spent about $4 million to water rights to improve tracking of water. We've got a long ways to go, a long ways to go to track water. We can use less all day long. If we don't track it, measure it, and get it to lake, who knows where it goes, right? And so those two hurdles have to be left over at the same time together.
Have they started tracking now? Because you said earlier that they don't, I mean, they talk about it, but they haven't really done it.
We are, there's water tracking, but to the extent where we can track it enough, all the way down, it just takes huge amounts of equipment, manpower, person power, you know, ability to do that. And so that's where we've got to head.
Is there any talk among farmers about using alternate crops or something?
Yes, all the time. That's the easy answer. There's very few farmers that I talk to that say they would try another crop if they could sell it.
And
They try, yeah.
They didn't pan out very well for those that went to hemp, but we're always open for options. Like I say, we've transitioned out of the dairy industry, so now I've got to make a living off of my farm. And so I'm looking for whatever crop will bring me the best income. You know, I'm looking at the margins. Where's my margin the best? And I'm open to just about anything that will help there.
And here's
What's that?
Here's a few examples, and then that show how willing farmers are. When quinoa, everybody started eating quinoa, and then so farmers started growing it, and a lot of farmers started growing it, and the market flooded, and then people lost tons of money and went out of business. Hemp, the same thing happened.
you
People,
can do everything with hemp, that's the thing.
Yeah.
Quinoa, you can't make clothes or rope out of, but you can with hemp.
so
You
that,
can eat it.
but the point.
No manufacturers.
Yeah, the point is that farmers are really anxious to find new crops, and sometimes they get really burned in doing that because the markets aren't there to support it.
I just want to interject a minute. We won't get to all your questions, obviously, but we're really trying to do it in an organized manner. So if you could either raise your hand so I can pass you the mic, or if you have a note card, we'll just try to get through as many as we can. So the next question.
So, just real quick,
Next question.
somebody asked, to add to that, on our operation, you know, I agree with Matt. The quick answer is yes. You know, there are hundreds of different species that we can and maybe should be planting at diverse times. But remember, like I said, on our operation, our focus is about the natural cycles. We need to sync ourselves with those in a way that's also functional but profitable. If we don't have profitability, we're not going to be here. It's not going to work. So, to answer that on our operation, as we plant cover crops and we've tried dozens and dozens of different species, some of which most of our seed suppliers never heard of before. And they had to go out and find it and brought it in, and we found that it grows well here. If a cow will eat it, it's not a weed anymore. It now becomes a protein. It's a protein for you and I to consume, and it's profitable for me, and it's good for the soil if it's managed correctly. So there are a lot of options that farmers can continue to utilize in different ways. It's about changing the way we look at things, though, but we need to remember this is a cycle. Not one plant is going to work. It's for the whole system. There's not one, and on the backside, reducing one plant. We talk about the A word. Eliminating one plant isn't the answer either. It's finding a system that works continuously and efficiently.
Thank you. We have a question back here, and then I have two more on the note cards I want to get to. So if you still have a question, please write it down on the note card, and then we'll try to get it answered for you and email it to you. This might be all we get to today.
Thank you. So I kind of want to circle back to a question that was brought up earlier. And I'm concerned that I'm excited for farmers to thrive in Utah. I want our agricultural, to preserve our agricultural heritage, and I think that there's a lot of value that farmers produce in our state, and I want them to see it succeed. But I'm concerned about the way that it's being framed here, because if we're going to have to make a decision between asking 4 million people to move out of the state because of toxic dust clouds, or asking several, maybe tens of thousands of farmers to close shop, we know who's going to get the axe, and it's not the 4 million other people. And so when you're asking about, we just need time, you're not framing this very well. And when you say, we're just a tiny part of the GDP, so don't judge us on GDP, but then Matt goes ahead and says, but the GDP of the lake is only, $2 billion, and this other GDP is much. You can't have it both ways. I'm really concerned that instead of trying to engaging in that sort of tribalism where you're protecting the turf, you're not thinking outside the box to finding actual solutions, like pricing water for what it is, what value it is. And if the farmers of Utah got together and said, you know what, we're going to fight for really good pricing. We're going to solve the problem of not pricing water on the heads of Utah's poor people. If you were looking for solutions that didn't look like a turf war, you would have a lot more success. And I guess that's more of a comment than a question. But I'm really concerned that from what I'm hearing from you guys at the panel, it's going to be hard for people like myself who want you to succeed to really get behind you, because it doesn't sound good.
You want me to answer that? Well, it wasn't really a question, so I can't answer it. No, a valid point that you make there. Think about it personally. If somebody asked you to come and give up your living for the good of Utah, what would you do? Right? It's understandable that the agriculture industry is trying to protect their interest. It's their business, right? And so it becomes this great challenge, right? To say that 4 million people are that's the entire population of Utah, by the way, would have to leave the state. It's not reality, I don't think. Is there massive concerns because of the lake? Yes, massive health concerns. Is it going to dry up in 5 years? Probably not. Do we need to make changes so we get more water there? Yes. Is it going to take time? Yes. I mean, as Trevor said, it's just, you can't change things overnight unless, money could maybe fix that to a little bit of an extent, but not all of it, right? There's just limits. There's limits in resource and people and things to make these changes. I think we have to start, and that's what you've heard today, is that there's been a lot of things happening to move in that direction of using less in agriculture and getting more to the lake. And so I think we have to keep doing that and do it as fast as we can. But to say that tomorrow or next year we're gonna suddenly put 1 million acre feet into the lake, it's just not possible. Unless we make catastrophic changes. And so.
There's a catastrophic change, sorry, that's just from an environmental perspective. I think he made a very good point of like, if you're trying to engage with people, I feel like maybe instead of speaking around the issue, speaking more, because again,
Yeah, from both ends too, right? The catastrophic effects of the lake, catastrophic effects to the industry of agriculture if we suddenly.
Well, to the public health of everyone, including farmers who live, like the dust will affect you guys as well. Which is
Well, and the comment I was gonna make was just that agriculture, for the most part, has the priority in the prior appropriation system. So unfortunately, we're in a problem spot in the fact that the water that's used to sustain the citizens is junior to the agricultural sector. But we understand we need to do our part. So kind of the thought that we aren't coming to play ball, I mean, this is the busiest time of the year for us as agricultural producers, as water managers, but yet we took the time to come visit with you folks. We're talking about optimizing our systems for the good of the society when, based on pure draconian property rights, we could not be part of the conversation. And we don't disagree with the assessment that that's going to end poorly for us, and that's why we're at the table. We would like to be able to use the water as synergistically as possible, and we're at the table working with the environmental community, and that's kind of where we intend to stay, because we know that we need to survive, and we would like to do our part.
Thank you. I think we also need to be aware of our potential in this issue. I think asking the farmers to do everything is unfair. I mean, they're pretty overwhelmed, I think, as it is. But we can lobby. We can talk to our legislators. We can tell our neighbors that it's not an easy fix, that it might take years. So what can we do meanwhile to help?
There's afternoon sessions on that, I think, legislature and local.
Yes, there is an afternoon session on.
Two legislators here if you want to talk to us afterwards.
Two legislators, please stand up.
Thank you. Oh.
There's so much more to these to say about this. I want to know what every single person sitting in DC stop these 5 men for using water, not your home, to your yard, to your operation.
Thank you. There's just a lot.
Like, how many people here have a lawn that they water like all summer long? I'm just saying,
huge.
I think if you're gonna ask other people to sacrifice, look at what you could do on your own property first.
Yeah, it's gonna
Right.
take us all. It's gonna take everybody.
And what we eat makes a huge difference also, because they are, as Trevor told me, we're gonna grow what you wanna eat. And so if you wanna eat meat, then they're gonna grow alfalfa and cattle and et cetera, or dairy or milk or whatever. We are out of time. Lunch was supposed to be at 1. So thank you very much. Please thank our panelists.